The morning I understood what my son had been doing, I was standing in my own kitchen holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. I'd been standing there for almost 10 minutes, reading the same email on a screen that wasn't even supposed to be mine, and I couldn't move. Not because I was too old or too slow or too confused, all things my son had been telling other people about me for months. I couldn't move because I was doing the math, and the math was not in his favor. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My wife Ruth and I were married for 41 years. We built a life in Dayton, Ohio. Not a glamorous life, not a wealthy one, but a solid one. I spent 33 years as a licensed electrician, worked my way up to running my own small crew, retired at 68 with a paid-off house, a decent pension, and a savings account I'd been adding to since 1987. Ruth taught third grade for 26 years. We raised 2 children in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Drive, took 1 real vacation a year, drove sensible cars, and watched every college football game Ohio State ever played together on our green couch that we probably should have replaced 10 years before we did. Ruth got her diagnosis in the spring. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She was gone by November. I don't know how to describe the particular silence of a house after 41 years of marriage. People try. They say things like hollow or empty or like something has been taken from the air. Those are all true. But what I remember most is the specific sounds that disappeared. The sound of her chair scraping back from the breakfast table. The sound of the weather report she always turned on before bed. The sound of her saying my name from another room, just to check that I was still there. Raymond. That's my name. Raymond Kowalski. 72 years old. Retired. Widower. My son Marcus was 44 when his mother died. He lived about an hour away in Columbus with his wife and their 2 kids, and for the first several months after the funeral, I barely heard from him. That wasn't unusual. Marcus had always been the practical one. Not cold, exactly, but the kind of man who showed love through logistics. He'd organized the funeral arrangements. He'd handled the paperwork with the insurance company. He'd been efficient and competent, and I'd been grateful, even if I'd wished sometimes that he'd just sat down with me and said nothing at all. My daughter lived in Portland. She called every Sunday, and sometimes during the week when she had a feeling about things, which she often did. She had wanted to fly out and stay with me after the funeral, but I told her not to. She had a job, 2 kids of her own, a life that didn't need to be paused on my account. I told her I was fine. I told everybody I was fine. About 8 months after Ruth died, Marcus started coming around more. Every Sunday, regular as a clock. He'd show up around noon with something his wife had cooked: casseroles, soups, once a whole pot roast, and he'd sit at my kitchen table, and we'd talk for a couple of hours. I was glad for it. I won't pretend otherwise. Those Sundays had started to feel like something I could hold on to during the week, something to look forward to. He started asking about finances sometime around month 3 of those Sunday visits. Not in a suspicious way, or at least not in a way I recognized as suspicious at the time. Just questions. How was I managing the bills? Had I looked into whether my pension was being fully optimized? Did I have a financial planner? He knew a guy, if I was interested. No pressure. I told him I was managing fine. I'd always handled our finances. Ruth had trusted me with the numbers, and I'd never given her reason not to. I knew what I had. I knew what I spent. I paid my bills on time. I wasn't worried. But Marcus was persistent, not pushy, exactly just consistently present with his concern. Month by month, Sunday by Sunday, the conversation kept finding its way back to the same place. What would happen if I got sick? Had I thought about long-term care? Did I have a plan? He'd read something about seniors losing significant assets to healthcare costs. He knew someone whose father had spent down everything in a nursing facility. He just didn't want that to happen to me. I started to believe that I might be missing something. That's the thing I want people to understand, because I think it's important. It wasn't one big lie. It was a slow accumulation of small suggestions, each one delivered with what looked like love, until I couldn't quite remember what my own confidence had felt like before. By spring of that year, roughly 14 months after Ruth's funeral, I had agreed to let Marcus help manage some of my accounts. Just the online banking, he said, just to make sure everything was set up correctly, that the automatic payments were going through, that I wasn't getting charged any fees I didn't know about. I was having a little trouble with the new banking app on my phone anyway, and Marcus was good with technology. It seemed practical. He set up a shared login. He said it was easier that way. I didn't think much of it. My granddaughter Paige was the one who changed everything. She was 26, finishing her last year of a business degree with a concentration in finance. She'd always been sharp in a quiet way, the kind of person who noticed everything but didn't make a show of it. She had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's patience, and she visited me every few months when she could get away from school. She was the one member of my family who never talked to me like I was a problem that needed solving. She came in the third week of October, drove up from Cincinnati on a Friday afternoon, showed up with a bag of groceries, and plans to spend the weekend. I made spaghetti. We watched a movie. We talked about her mother, my daughter, who was planning a visit for Christmas. I slept better those 2 nights than I had in weeks. On Saturday afternoon, I was in the garage, reorganizing some of my tools, and Paige was at the kitchen table with her laptop doing schoolwork. She called out to me after about an hour and asked if I had a printer she could use to print out an assignment. I told her the printer in the study was connected to the tablet on the desk. Just turn it on, and it should connect automatically. This is the part I've thought about many times since then, trying to understand exactly how it happened. Marcus had been at the house 2 weekends before to help me with a software update. He'd used the tablet in the study during that visit. I remembered him sitting there, typing something, while I made coffee. When he left, he had logged into his own email account on the tablet to check something, and apparently had stayed logged in. He'd probably forgotten entirely. To him, it was a small oversight. To me, it turned out to be everything. Paige turned on the tablet. It connected to the printer. But when it woke up, the email application opened automatically. Marcus's email, still signed in from his visit 2 weeks before. And Paige, who had not done anything wrong, who had simply turned on a tablet to print an assignment, found herself looking at an inbox that wasn't her grandfather's. She didn't snoop. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me. She saw one subject line in the preview, and that subject line stopped her cold. It said, Kowalski Property Timeline Revised Appraisal Attached. She sat with that for a moment. Then she scrolled down just enough to read the preview text beneath it. She came to the garage doorway and stood there. I looked up from the workbench, and I could tell something had happened. She had her grandmother's eyes, and they were doing something I hadn't seen them do before. She said, "Grandpa, can you come inside for a minute?" I set down the wrench. We sat at the kitchen table together, and she showed me what she'd seen. She hadn't opened the email. She'd taken a photo of the screen with her own phone, and then she'd closed the application and come to find me. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they're working very hard to be calm. The email preview was from an attorney in Columbus named Gregory Harmon. His firm specialized in real estate transactions and estate planning. The preview text beneath the subject line said, "Marcus attached is the revised appraisal for the Maple Ridge property." The number came in at $287K, which is favorable given current market conditions. As discussed, I would recommend proceeding with the initial conversation with your father no later than... That's where the preview cut off. I looked at that text for a long time. Then I looked at Paige. She asked me, very quietly, if I knew anything about plans to sell the house. I told her I did not. She asked me if I had spoken with a real estate attorney, or signed anything recently, or agreed to any kind of transaction involving the property. I told her I had not. And then I told her about the shared banking login. I watched her face as I explained it. She didn't react dramatically. She just listened, nodding slightly, and when I finished, she asked if she could see the banking app on my phone. I handed it to her. She spent about 15 minutes going through it, and I made coffee, and when I brought her cup to the table, her expression had gone somewhere quieter and more serious than it had been before. She showed me what she'd found. Over the preceding 8 months, there had been a series of transfers out of my savings account. None of them were enormous. The largest was just over $3,000. The smallest was $400. They were all listed under a transfer description that said household maintenance services. I had not authorized any of them. I had not been billed for any maintenance work. There were 11 transfers in total. The combined amount was just over $19,000. I set down my coffee cup before I dropped it. Paige said, "Grandpa, I need you to not call Marcus yet." She said it gently, but she meant it. She said she needed me to trust her for a few days. I told her she had my complete trust. I'd had 41 years of practice trusting someone implicitly, and some part of me recognized that same quality of steadiness in her. She spent the rest of that Saturday making notes. She photographed the transfers with her phone. She wrote down the dates, the amounts, the descriptions. She called her finance professor a woman she trusted and described the pattern without giving names. And the professor confirmed what Paige already suspected. This was a classic pattern of gradual financial exploitation. Small enough amounts to avoid triggering bank alerts. Regular enough intervals to normalize the outflow. A transfer description designed to sound routine. That night, we talked for a long time after dinner. Paige walked me through what she thought Marcus had been building toward. The banking access was the first layer. The real estate attorney, the appraisal, that was the second layer. She believed he had been planning to present me with a proposal to sell the house, and that the proposal would come packaged with a reason I should say yes. Maybe that I needed the money for care. Maybe that the house was too much to manage on my own. Maybe that moving somewhere smaller made sense at my age. She asked me something then that I hadn't asked myself, and it hit me harder than I expected. She said, "Has anyone told you recently that you're not as sharp as you used to be?" I thought about it, and I realized that yes, in fact, several people had. Marcus had said it, more than once gently, always gently, that I'd seemed forgetful lately, that I'd repeated a story he'd already heard, that he'd noticed I was struggling with the banking app, and wasn't that a sign that maybe things were getting a little complicated for me to manage alone? He'd mentioned it to my daughter during a phone call, which she'd relayed to me with concern, asking if everything was really okay. He'd apparently said something similar to my neighbor Bill, because Bill had asked me once, out of nowhere, whether I'd thought about moving to one of those senior communities over on the east side. I hadn't connected those dots until that moment at my kitchen table with my granddaughter. Marcus had been constructing a narrative, a quiet, gradual one, not all at once, not dramatically, just a steady trickle of suggestion, dropped into the right ears, building a picture of a man who was slipping, an old man alone in a house that was too big for him, an old man who needed someone to manage things on his behalf. I thought about Ruth. I thought about the 33 years I'd spent running electrical work, diagnosing problems, tracing circuits, finding the one wire out of hundreds that was causing the failure. I had spent my entire career reading systems carefully, methodically, without rushing to conclusions. And I thought, I should have read this more carefully. I should have traced the wire. But I hadn't, because the person laying the wire had been my son. Paige stayed through Sunday. She found an elder law attorney in Dayton through her professor, a woman named Carol Finch, who had a solid reputation and who agreed to see us Monday morning on short notice when Paige explained the situation. We did not tell Marcus anything. We did not change anything. The banking app sat on my phone exactly as it was. The tablet in the study sat exactly where it had been. We didn't want him to know that anything had shifted. Carol Finch was a small woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses she wore on top of her head when she wasn't using them, and a directness that I found immediately comforting. She listened to everything we told her for almost 2 hours without interrupting, except to occasionally ask a clarifying question. Then she put her glasses on and looked at the documentation Paige had photographed and said, in a tone that was matter-of-fact rather than dramatic, that what we had was serious, that the financial exploitation alone was enough to support a civil claim and potentially a criminal one, and that we needed to act methodically. She explained what we were dealing with. The unauthorized transfers were financial exploitation of an elder, a criminal offense in Ohio. The appraisal and the communication with the real estate attorney suggested advanced planning, which spoke to intent. The pattern of building a narrative about my cognitive decline without any medical basis, without any professional evaluation, was a calculated strategy to establish grounds for seeking guardianship or power of attorney over my affairs. She used a phrase I hadn't heard before. She called it grooming for guardianship, the deliberate undermining of a person's perceived competence in the eyes of family, neighbors, and eventually courts, so that when the guardianship petition came, there would already be a body of opinion supporting it. The financial draining in the meantime was the bonus money taken before anyone was officially watching. I sat with that for a moment. My son had looked at me after his mother died and had seen not a father to take care of, but an asset to manage. Carol asked me several times if I was certain, if I was sure I wanted to proceed. Not because she doubted what I'd told her, but because she understood what proceeding meant. Marcus was my son. Whatever came next would change that permanently and completely. I told her I was certain. I told her that the man who had been coming to my house every Sunday for 14 months, with his wife's casseroles and his gentle suggestions and his slow accumulation of access, had made a choice, and I was going to respond to that choice clearly and with documentation. We spent the next 9 days building the case. Carol worked with a forensic accountant colleague of hers to pull together a complete picture of the financial transfers. The bank, once contacted through proper legal channels with the documentation we provided, was cooperative and fast-moving. They flagged the account and began an internal review. The transfers all traced back to an account in Marcus's name. I went to my primary care physician and had a complete cognitive evaluation done. Not because I doubted myself, but because Carol said it would be important to establish on record that I was fully competent, fully aware, and fully capable of making my own financial and legal decisions. My doctor cleared me without hesitation. She told me my cognition was excellent. She also told me, with some heat in her voice, that she'd seen this pattern before and that it made her furious every time. I changed my banking passwords. I revoked Marcus's access. I did this quietly, through the bank's fraud department, so that it wouldn't show on the app's activity log in any way that would alert him. I updated my will. I updated my beneficiary designations on my pension and my retirement accounts. I had Carol prepare a durable power of attorney designating my daughter in Portland as my agent, someone who lived 1,000 miles away and had never, not once, made me feel like a problem to be managed. On a Wednesday afternoon, about 9 days after Paige had walked into my garage doorway with something in her eyes, Marcus called me. A regular check-in call. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I'd thought any more about the future. He said he had something he wanted to talk to me about, something he thought I should hear with an open mind, and asked if he could come by that Sunday. I told him, of course. Sunday was fine. I'd have coffee ready. I called Carol as soon as I hung up. She called a contact at the Dayton Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, a detective named Webb, who had worked elder financial exploitation cases for several years. He came to Carol's office the following day. We went through everything. He was quiet and efficient and told me what he needed from the Sunday meeting and what he didn't need, and what my role was and wasn't. My role was simple. I just had to be myself. Marcus arrived at 12:15 that Sunday, later than usual. He came alone, no food this time, no casserole dish. He looked like a man who had prepared for something. He dressed well. He sat down at my kitchen table in the chair he always sat in, and he put a manila folder on the table between us, and he talked to me for about 20 minutes. He said he was worried about me. He said the house was too much, the maintenance, the bills, the yard, all of it. He said he'd spoken with some people, done some research, and there were really wonderful options for men in my situation. Comfortable places, active communities. He'd done some preliminary numbers, and if I sold the house now while the market was favorable, there would be money left over after care costs. It would take the pressure off everyone. He pushed the folder toward me. Inside was the appraisal, the same one we'd seen the subject line of in that email. $287,000 for the house Ruth and I had lived in for 31 years. He had a document ready for me to sign, a listing agreement with a real estate agency I'd never heard of. I looked at the folder. I looked at my son. I thought about Ruth. I thought about the green couch we'd watched football on, the breakfast table, the sound of her chair scraping back. I thought about the Sunday mornings she used to make pancakes and the Sunday mornings I had spent the past 14 months waiting for my son's car to pull into the driveway because it was the thing I had to look forward to in a week. I said, Marcus, I need to tell you something. I told him that I knew about the transfers. I told him about Carol Finch. I told him about the forensic accountant and the bank's fraud department, and the cognitive evaluation and the police detective. I told him all of it, calmly, in order, the way I would have walked a customer through a wiring problem. This connects to this, which leads to this, which is where the failure is. He went very still. I told him that Detective Webb was outside in a car and had been since 11 that morning. I told him that everything he'd said in the past 20 minutes had been recorded, which was legal in Ohio under the one-party consent rule, and which Carol had confirmed. I told him that the folder he'd brought, the listing agreement, would be added to the documentation already in the hands of law enforcement. He tried to talk. He said I was misunderstanding. He said the transfers had been for actual maintenance work. I must have just forgotten authorizing them. He said he was only trying to help. He said he was my son. I told him I remembered that. Detective Webb came to the door at 12:57. Marcus was formally interviewed that afternoon. The process that followed took several months, as these things do, because the legal system is slow and careful and built for careful. Carol Finch was neither slow nor careless, and she pushed where it was appropriate to push. Marcus was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly adult, which in Ohio is a third-degree felony. His attorney negotiated a plea that included full restitution of the $19,400 and a period of supervised probation. He did not go to prison. That was not my decision to make, and I have complicated feelings about it that I am still working through, because he is still my son, and I don't think that fact goes away no matter what a person does with it. What I know is this: the house on Maple Ridge Drive is still mine. My finances are in order. My daughter flew in from Portland the week after everything came out, and she stayed for 3 weeks, and we sat on the green couch. Yes, it's still there. And we watched Ohio State lose a game they should have won, and we cried about her mother, and we laughed about some things too. She is my power of attorney now, legally, officially. She calls twice a week, and she means it every time. Paige graduated in May. She's working in financial compliance now, at a firm that does, among other things, elder financial fraud detection. She sends me articles sometimes. I read them all. I want to say something directly to the people who are going to hear this story, because I think it matters. I was not confused. I was not declining. I was not unable to manage my own life. I was lonely, and I was grieving. And I had made the mistake of assuming that the concern someone showed me was proportional to the love behind it. That was not a cognitive failure. That was a human one, and it can happen to any of us. What I want you to take from this is not that you should be suspicious of everyone who offers to help you. Most people who offer to help are simply offering to help. What I want you to take is that your signature is yours. Your account is yours. Your home is yours. No one who loves you will pressure you to act quickly. No one who loves you will tell other people you're slipping before they've ever said that to a doctor. No one who loves you will bring you a folder with a listing agreement the first time they raise the subject of your future. If someone is building a case even quietly, even gently, for why you cannot be trusted to manage your own affairs, that is not love. That is preparation. Get an elder law attorney's number before you need it. Talk to your doctor if anyone starts suggesting your mind is going. Tell someone you trust when something feels wrong, even if you're not sure yet what the wrong thing is. Paige changed everything for me because she said something the moment she noticed it. She didn't wait until she was certain. She didn't wait until she had all the answers. She came to the garage doorway and she said, "Grandpa, can you come inside for a minute?" That is what people who love you do. They come find you. Ruth would have found me. She always did. I think about what she would say about all of this. I think she would skip past the part about Marcus because she would find it too painful to stay there long. She would go straight to Paige. She would say that girl has her head on right. She would say it the way she said things about people she was proud of. Quiet and certain and final. She would be right. I am still in the house on Maple Ridge Drive. The yard needs work in the spring, and the gutters need cleaning every October, and there is a ceiling fan in the bedroom that has been making a sound for 2 years that I keep meaning to look at and have not yet looked at. The house is more than I need, probably. Someday I may make a different choice about it, on my own terms, on my own timeline, for reasons that are mine. Until then, it is mine. That matters more than I knew how to say before all of this happened. It matters in a way I feel in my chest when I walk through the front door and hang my keys on the hook where I have always hung them. It matters in a way that has nothing to do with money or square footage or market value. It matters because Ruth is in every room of that house, and no folder, no signature, no listing agreement was ever going to change that. I want to close with something I've been thinking about since the morning I stood in my kitchen reading that email with a cup of cold coffee in my hand. The wire I missed was the one right in front of me, the one I'd been looking at every Sunday for 14 months, calling it something warm and familiar, not examining it the way I would have examined anything else in my life that deserved scrutiny. I was a careful man in most things. I was not careful in this one thing, because this one thing was supposed to be safe. Nothing is safe just because it wears a familiar face, but nothing is hopeless just because it surprised you. You can still trace the circuit. You can still find the failure. You can still cut the power before the damage is permanent. I did. You can too. Find a doctor you trust, an attorney who specializes in elder law, a family member or friend who will tell you the truth. Build those relationships before you need them. Write down the numbers. Keep them somewhere only you know. And if someone you love is over 60 and living alone, call them. Not just on the holidays. Call them on a Tuesday. For no reason, just to say their name and hear them say yours. That is what Ruth always did. It was how I always knew I was still there.